Good morning, and thanks to everybody for showing up early on the last day. I appreciate that, and thanks, Bernie, for the kind introduction, and to Anemocite for the opportunity. I'm really excited to take you on a little bit of a journey this morning, a kind of glimpse of what the future looks like, and sort of a new way to think about innovation in global pharma. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's happening to kind of create commercial markets 250 miles up, why it's important to think about it, and how the industry itself, especially for cell therapies, is aligning with what we're doing in microgravity. So just a little bit of a start. Most people think that when the shuttle program ended, so did space. And the truth is, that's actually when the International Space Station was actually fully built. So from the perspective of 250 miles up and an international space station, the US portion is actually designated as a federal national laboratory. Again, I don't think often people think to look up and think about what's overhead or that it's a laboratory that's accessible. I wanted to take a second just to give you a little bit of background on the ISS. It's about the size of a 2-story, 5-bedroom house, about the size of a football field, and I'm so pleased to be showing a Super Bowl football stadium with the upcoming game. If you notice, this is actually in Miami, it's Sun Life Stadium. So we wanted to add a little bit of flavor. You can look up every night, pretty much, and see the space station overhead. So please do that. There's a tracking app for you to be able to see it as well. But I thought I would also tell you a little bit about, what happens inside the station as well. Before I do that, I have 2 mission patches, and I thought we'd have a little interaction this morning. So anybody who might know how fast the space station actually travels will be the winner of a patch. Anybody have a guess?
32,000 miles per hour.
Close.
31,000.
Little less, but thank you for the effort. 17,500 miles an hour. Yes, so you're closer, so you will actually win the patch, which is fantastic. All right, now if you can do math, so that means every 90 minutes, the station actually orbits the Earth. So a guess on how many sunrises and sunsets you see on station? Anyone? Fantastic. It is indeed 16. Can you pass that back to her? Thank you. So it's present all the time. It's operating all the time. The inside of the station is actually just a complete and total laboratory. It's packed from floor to ceiling, obviously because there's no orientation. You can work on every space, and you have some very unique conditions.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Falcon Heavy.
So that's how we get there. And right now, one of the things that is really intriguing is the fact that vehicles are actually being built to carry crew as well as payloads. This was the actual Falcon Heavy launch that happened in February of last year. Pretty exciting. It's the first time that we've really had the capacity to be able to lift capsules and vehicles that will be rated for human spaceflight. But in addition to opportunities that we have for spaceflight that will bring people up, one of the things that is really interesting that's happening to create the marketplace is the fact that we have a full infrastructure that's developing. So when you think about how economies develop, obviously when the West was settled, you had people traveling by caravan, covered wagons. Trains came in, that made it a little more accessible. By the time we had planes, it was easy for people to get back and forth. And now, when you think about even air travel, international travel used to be something that was, considered to be expensive and timely. We can get back and forth, international travel for several $100s and in a very inexpensive way. So the same thing is happening in space. There are lots of companies that are building rockets of very different types, not just to carry people, but to carry payloads of all types. In addition to the rockets that are being built, there's a lot of vehicles and platforms that are being developed. So you start to see things that are going to be not only commercial crew vehicles, like the SpaceX vehicle, but actual platforms that are private space stations. So in addition to ISS, eventually there will be platforms where people can actually live and potentially work. There's additional platforms like the one that we're working on, which is a free flyer that basically allows you to do things like manufacture on orbit as well. I think the most important thing about what's happening in space is that when we've thought about long duration travel and going to places like the moon and Mars, we've thought about leaving footprints behind. This time, we're here to stay. What's happening in the economy that's being built in space is really the future of what global is going to look like. At the moment, the market space economy is basically satellites. It is an opportunity to use that vantage point from looking down on the planet as well as communications. And it's a substantial industry. In fact, one of the things that, I tell this story all the time because it's the first time I started working with the National Lab. I was at a meeting and someone said, let's go to launch. And it was about 10:30 and I thought, gee, that's kind of early for lunch. And we walked out the door and this huge rocket just took off right in front of me. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so the satellite market, rocket launches are happening every day. From a commercial resupply mission standpoint, where our payloads now fly, that's probably every 8 to 12 weeks. And so it's a very active space. In microgravity, things change. So from a materials science standpoint, physical properties are completely different. Those can actually be leveraged to help you when you think about making things like technology products. So optical fibers are how we transmit data. Data, as everyone knows, our data needs continue to grow as we have more and more data that's being moved around. When you think about sort of 5G speeds right now, optical fibers that can be produced in microgravity actually have no impurities, which means their data transmission rate is about 100-fold what we have today. So it's advances like that that are really going to change the paradigm of how we think about thin film coatings on semiconductors, optical fibers for data transmission, but all of those physical properties that you saw in the last slide, things like no convection, no friction, no heat generated in the process, no impurities because of no sedimentation, really drive this opportunity. From a biological standpoint, the same thing happens. You have changes in gene expression, you have changes in the way cells signal with one another, changes in the way they aggregate. Bacteria, some strains are much more virulent in microgravity. So again, all properties that really can be leveraged in terms of thinking about not only how we do discovery, but how we might be able to do manufacturing. When you think about where the industry itself is going, so from a pharma perspective, it always used to be pills. In the last few years, it's biologics or cell therapies that are really starting to take over. And where we're probably headed is gene therapy. Things that are difficult to do right now from a biologics or cell manufacturing perspective are sometimes a little bit easier to do in microgravity. Same thing with gene therapy, delivery technologies, encapsulation, nanoparticle formation. Those are all things that are much more approachable when you don't have gravity in the equation. So I wanted to just take a second in this second to last slide to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that are currently going on, because I'm sure as you're thinking about this, you're saying, this all sounds great, but what's happening today? So from the perspective of work on station, we actually are working on a project for retinal implants. It's a protein polymer-based implant that actually can be produced more uniformly. So for patients with retinitis pigmentosa, macular degeneration, eventually they may be able to have a prosthetic implant that's manufactured in space. From a biologics standpoint, stem cell production, stem cells grow faster in microgravity. Their differentiation cycle is a little bit delayed. There may be some advantages from a manufacturing perspective there. Biologics, CHO cells, E. coli, yeast, all the things that I talked about before in terms of changes that can happen in how those cells express, that could be significant in terms of changing the paradigm. Personalized medicine applications, obviously, are also something that we're very interested in looking at, as well as continuous API. So flow chemistry, surface tension, all those factors that are different really give you some advantages in the process. And the work that is being done today on ISS is actually the foundation for moving off of the ISS and onto platforms like the free-flying vehicles that can manufacture on orbit. So I would ask you, the next time that you think about global, look up and think about 250 miles overhead and ask, what's the next medical breakthrough? And maybe it really isn't on the planet.